Thomas Bennett had not slept a full night in exactly 18 months and 12 days. Not since the accident. Each night began the same. He would stare at the ceiling of his master bedroom, his mind refusing to quiet. He would relive every moment of that phone call. The flashing red and blue lights, the haunting words from the paramedics. "Mr. Bennett, your wife didn't make it." The words had carved themselves so deeply into his soul that even the softest whisper of wind outside his window sounded like sirens. He would lie awake in a bed too big for one person, with nothing but silence and regret, echoing off the cold walls of the mansion. At exactly 2:12 a.m., he would sit up, unable to bear the weight of stillness. Some nights he drank, others he wandered through the dark hallways of the house, as if looking for something he had lost, and every morning he would put on his tailored suit and carry on like the man he used to be. To the world he was Thomas Bennett, real estate mogul, widowed father of one, the man who had built luxury towers across downtown Seattle, the man with the $4.3 million home perched above Lake Washington. But inside he was just a ghost. It had started affecting Lily too. His 6-year-old daughter had stopped speaking in full sentences. At school she barely interacted. She had not smiled since her mother's funeral. The therapist said it was grief-related selective mutism. Thomas called it punishment. For being absent, for not being there that night, for living when Amanda didn't. The household staff did their best. Gloria, the aging housekeeper, did not hide her judgment. 3 nannies had come and gone in 6 months. One lasted 4 days. Then came Elena. She was not recommended by an agency. She came from a note slipped into his mailbox. A handwritten letter, signed simply, "I know how to help, not just her, you too." Elena arrived on a Wednesday morning a little past 9 a.m., wearing a simple navy blue coat and a tired smile. Her references were minimal, her resume vague, but something about her presence made the air feel warmer. Thomas almost turned her away. He didn't trust strangers, not anymore. But Lily, who had ignored every adult in the house for months, walked straight up to the woman and tugged lightly on the sleeve of her coat. "You smell like pancakes," she whispered. It was the first thing she had said to anyone in weeks. That night, for the first time in over a year, Lily slept through the night. But Thomas did not. He sat in his study until dawn, trying to understand what had just happened. Who was this woman who could walk into his home and quiet the storm his daughter had been drowning in? It was 3 nights later that Thomas awoke, suddenly heart-racing sweat beating at his temple. The nightmare had returned, the crash, the scream, the sirens. And then he heard something, a voice, not loud, not urgent, just soft. From down the hallway, through the cracked door of his daughter's bedroom, he heard Elena's voice. "Close your eyes now. You're safe. Your mom still loves you, and your dad, he's still learning how to breathe." Thomas froze. No one had ever said that to his daughter. No one had ever said that to him. And in that moment, for reasons he could not yet explain, Thomas Bennett realized that this woman, the stranger with no history, had just done the unthinkable. She had reached a part of his heart he thought was long dead, and he could finally sleep. Thomas Bennett was the kind of man whose name appeared in business journals and architecture magazines, more than in any neighborhood newsletter. He wasn't loud about his success, but it spoke for itself through the structures he built, the parties he skipped, and the long hours he spent in a sleek office tower he had designed himself. At 43, he had already retired twice, but both times came back because building was all he knew. But no blueprint had prepared him for what life looked like after Amanda died. The Bennett estate sat quietly atop a wooded bluff, overlooking Lake Washington, framed by black pines and glass. From the outside, it was flawless, perfectly trimmed hedges, a circular driveway, 3 vintage cars parked beneath a private portico, and a stillness that made visitors whisper without knowing why. Inside, the silence was less elegant. It was weighted. Lily's laughter had once bounced off the tall ceilings, and Amanda's voice used to carry from the kitchen with melodies from old records and soft humming. Now the mansion had become a memory box that Thomas walked through like a ghost, retracing someone else's life. His daughter Lily Bennett had Amanda's wide eyes and curls that refused to be tamed. She was once full of stories and stubbornness, now withdrawn and almost translucent in her grief. She didn't throw tantrums or scream for her mother. She simply disappeared behind her silence. She sat for hours staring at the backyard swing Amanda had insisted on building herself. The staff had tried to bring Lily back nannies with degrees in childhood development speech, therapists with games and promises, even a family friend who offered to take her on a grief retreat for children. Nothing worked, nothing made her speak. Not until Elena. Elena Ramirez had not been born into privilege, but she had once walked among those who wore it comfortably. She had taught first grade in a small Seattle suburb, where children brought her drawings of their families and letters full of misspelled affection. Her classroom had been her safe place until her son died during a routine surgery that went horribly wrong. After that, Elena disappeared from the world she had once embraced. She moved across towns, did odd jobs, and kept her eyes down. Her grief didn't scream, it whispered. When she first stepped into the Bennett home, she saw the stillness and recognized it immediately. Grief lived here, not the loud kind that threw dishes or sobbed in public, the quiet kind, the kind that looked like polished marble and empty hallways. Thomas had interviewed her briefly. He didn't ask the usual questions. She didn't offer the usual answers. He had asked her one thing, "Why are you here?" And she had replied, "Because the kind of silence in this house is familiar to me." She was hired on the spot. Gloria, the housekeeper, who had served the Bennett family since Thomas was a boy, was not thrilled. She believed in hierarchy protocols, proper references. Elena brought none of those. She brought only a canvas bag with 2 dresses, a book of poetry, and a scent that reminded Lily of pancakes. Elena's presence was gentle but not weak. She never raised her voice, never rushed her steps. She moved through the mansion as if listening for things no one else could hear. She spoke to Lily as if the girl had been speaking all along, and somehow that worked. Within a week, Lily began humming again. Not words, not sentences, just small notes, like her voice was stretching back into existence. Elena never pushed, only waited, and Thomas watched. From behind doors, from the corner of hallways, from the second-floor balcony that overlooked the kitchen. He found himself watching not just Lily, but Elena, the way she tied her hair back with an old ribbon, the way she folded the child's clothes, like it mattered the way. She placed a fresh flower in a glass jar beside Lily's bed each morning. He didn't know her story, and she didn't ask for his. But every now and then, their eyes would meet, and there was something there, recognition maybe, or shared sadness. The first time they spoke beyond pleasantries was late one evening after Lily had gone to bed. Thomas had walked into the kitchen to find Elena sitting alone reading a notebook. She looked up, not startled, just patient. "You don't sleep much either, huh?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "I forgot how." She closed the notebook. Grief has a strange way of asking for attention. If you ignore it, it shows up at 2 a.m. He didn't smile, but he didn't walk away. And in that silence, a new thread began to form. Not romantic, not yet, but something fragile. Something that felt like the beginning of breath. The days began to shift slowly, almost imperceptibly inside the Bennett home. Where there had once been silence, there were now quiet routines. Mornings started with the soft clinking of dishes, as Elena prepared Lily's breakfast. Always pancakes on Mondays, oatmeal on Wednesdays, and strawberries with honey on Fridays. It wasn't part of any written rule, just something Elena observed in Lily's reactions, subtle as they were. Thomas noticed everything. He noticed that his daughter now sat upright at the table, without being prompted, that she sometimes reached for Elena's hand while walking, that she lingered a little longer at the piano bench, even though she refused to play. And he noticed himself, noticing. At first, he convinced himself it was curiosity, an employer's instinct to monitor the new hire, especially one who came with no references and a vague past. But over time, it became something else, attention, followed by awareness, and eventually, something dangerously close to comfort. Thomas was a man who valued control. Every aspect of his business, every square foot of every property he had developed, was an exercise in precision. But when it came to Elena, he found himself surrendering small pieces of control without knowing why. He had allowed her to repaint Lily's room in a lighter shade, something Amanda would have debated for weeks. He had let her rearrange the bookshelves in the family library, which Amanda had called her sanctuary. And he had even allowed Elena to store a few of her own books there, noticing only later that they were poetry collections and children's stories about loss and bravery. The turning point came one afternoon when Thomas returned home early from a meeting that had been canceled last minute. The house was unusually quiet. Gloria was off that day. He wandered through the hallways until he heard laughter light-free and unmistakably Lily's. It came from the backyard. He followed the sound and saw them, Elena and Lily, sitting on the grass drawing with sidewalk chalk. There were stars, a sun with a smile, and in the center of the concrete, a stick-figure family, a man, a woman, and a little girl, holding both their hands. Thomas stopped in the shadow of the doorway, not wanting to disturb them. He couldn't remember the last time his daughter had laughed like that. It hit him then like a sudden gust of cold wind. He wasn't just watching someone heal his daughter. He was watching someone fill the space Amanda had left behind. That night, he stood longer than usual outside Lily's bedroom door. Through the crack, he saw Elena brushing Lily's hair, humming a lullaby. Thomas vaguely recognized from a music box Amanda used to wind up each night. Lily leaned into Elena without hesitation, resting her head against her shoulder. "Tell me a story," she whispered. Elena began one improvised and gentle about a girl who lost her light, but found it again in unexpected places, in pancakes, in paintings, in poetry, and in people. Thomas listened until the words blurred into a haze, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a stranger in his own home. But comfort breeds fear in the hearts of those who have lost. Thomas couldn't sleep that night. He paced the balcony outside his room, one hand clutching the railing, the other gripping a glass of bourbon. What was he doing? What was she doing? Was she here just to work? Or was there something more? He didn't know her intentions, and that made him uneasy. The next day, he found Elena in the library dusting the shelves. He stood silently at the door before speaking. "You're getting close to her." Elena turned, not startled, not defensive. "She lets me." "She doesn't let anyone," Thomas said. "Not even me." Elena nodded. "That's not true. She watches you when you leave for work. She waits for the sound of the door." Thomas didn't know what to say. He looked at the floor, then back at her. "Why are you really here?" he asked. "You don't act like a maid. You read Neruda and Maya Angelou. You speak like a teacher, not an employee." Elena smiled softly. "Maybe because I used to be one." "What changed?" he asked. Her eyes held something that flickered between sorrow and resilience. Life, a moment, the kind you don't come back from the same. Thomas nodded. He understood that kind of moment. For a second, neither of them moved. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything unsaid. The days that followed were filled with a new tension. Not the kind that caused discomfort, but the kind that made the air heavier when they were in the same room. Thomas began to time his returns to catch glimpses of her. He started asking her opinion on things he normally reserved for himself. What color sheets to order, what books Lily might enjoy next, even what kind of flowers looked best in the entryway. She always answered simply, honestly, without pretense. One evening, Elena walked into the study holding a cup of tea. She placed it quietly beside his laptop. "You've had the same expression for 3 hours," she said. It looked like it needed tea. Thomas looked up. He hadn't realized how exhausted he was. "Thank you." She turned to leave, but he stopped her. "Why do you always know what people need before they do?" Elena paused, considering the question. "Because when you've lived in the dark, you recognize the signs in others." That sentence stayed with him long after she had gone. That night, he dreamt of Amanda for the first time in months. But it wasn't a nightmare. She was smiling, not at him, but at someone just outside the frame of the dream. Someone holding Lily's hand. The next day, Thomas found himself watching Elena again, not with curiosity, but with yearning. He began to wonder what it would mean to open his heart again, not in a dramatic, sweeping way, but in quiet, consistent moments. Elena never asked for his time, but somehow she got it. She never offered advice, but somehow she gave peace. It was a Thursday morning when it all cracked open. Lily had drawn something at breakfast and slid it across the table to her father. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures, Thomas, Lily, and Elena. Underneath it, she had written a single word: home. Thomas's throat tightened. He looked at Elena, who was quietly pouring juice, pretending not to see. But her hands trembled just slightly. That day, he didn't go to the office. Instead, he took Lily to school himself, then returned home and found Elena in the garden. She looked up from pruning a rose bush, her face lit by sunlight and soil. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "Of course." He stood there for a second, gathering himself. "I think I'm scared of how much you matter. To Lily, to this house." Elena didn't flinch. "And to you," he met her gaze. "Yes, especially to me." She looked down at her gloves, then slowly removed them. "You don't need to be afraid of feeling again, Thomas. Grief didn't take away your ability to love. It just buried it under guilt. And in that moment, in the middle of a garden that Amanda once planted, Thomas reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched anyone without feeling like he was betraying a memory. And Elena didn't pull away. She held it like she had been waiting. Not just weeks, but perhaps years. The morning after he held her hand in the garden, something in the air felt different. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, but it was there. The silences between them grew warmer. The glances lingered longer. Elena didn't say anything about it. She returned to her routines with the same gentle efficiency, but Thomas could see it in the way she moved slower, more deliberate, like she was walking through a room filled with echoes she no longer feared. He didn't kiss her, he didn't confess anything. But every time he saw her brushing Lily's hair, adjusting a book on the shelf, or humming a lullaby while preparing tea, he felt the weight of something building inside him. Not urgency, not passion, just a quiet knowing. And yet knowing wasn't the same as understanding. That came later. It started with a question, a simple one. They were seated in the kitchen one afternoon. Lily was at school, and the rain outside tapped gently against the glass windows. Elena was shelling peas into a ceramic bowl. Thomas had just walked in, his phone still in his hand, from ending a call. "You said you used to be a teacher," he said. Elena nodded, not looking up. "I did. What happened?" She paused, not with hesitation, but as if flipping through memories that hadn't been opened in a long time. "I lost my son." The words came out with no tremble, but their weight dropped between them like a stone in water. Thomas blinked. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Most people don't," she replied. "I don't talk about him, not because I'm ashamed, but because I've learned that most people don't know what to say when they hear something like that." He sat down across from her. "Tell me anyway." She looked at him, truly looked, and in that moment, she saw that he wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was offering space. His name was Matteo. He was 7, curious, funny, obsessed with space. He had a telescope that was too big for our apartment, but he insisted on keeping it in the living room. Thomas smiled softly. "Sounds like someone I would have liked. You would have," she said. "He had a heart condition. We knew about it since he was a baby. He was scheduled for a routine procedure. It wasn't supposed to be complicated, but it was." She nodded. Something went wrong. "I was in the waiting room with a stuffed dinosaur he'd asked me to hold for him. They came out and told me he didn't make it, just like that. No warning, no second chances." Her voice didn't shake. It was as if the pain had been burned into steel. "I couldn't go back to teaching. Every child reminded me of him. Every classroom felt like a place he should have been. So I left. I drifted, took jobs that let me stay invisible." "Until here," Thomas said. "Yes," she said quietly. "Until here." He looked at her, and for a moment he saw past the calm, composed exterior to the raw wound underneath. She wasn't healing them because she was perfect. She was healing them because she had learned how to survive the impossible. Later that night, Thomas stood in the hallway outside Lily's room again. Elena was inside reading a book about stars. The same theme, space, wonder, Matteo. He realized she wasn't just giving his daughter safety. She was giving her pieces of a world she had lost. And maybe in return, Lily was giving her something back too. That night, he opened Amanda's closet. He hadn't touched it in over a year. It still smelled like her perfume. Her dresses were lined up neatly, untouched, preserved. But something had shifted in him. He didn't feel guilt. He felt permission, not to forget. Never that. but to move. The next morning he found Elena folding laundry in the guest room. "I kept her room exactly the same," he said. She turned. "Amanda's." He nodded. "Even the nightstand drawer. I haven't opened it." Elena looked at him with a softness that felt like light breaking through fog. "Maybe today's the day?" He nodded, then paused. "Would you come with me?" She hesitated for only a second before following him. In Amanda's room, the air felt thinner. He walked to the drawer slowly and opened it. Inside was a journal, her handwriting, a letter with his name on it. His hands trembled as he picked it up. Elena stepped back, giving him space. He opened the letter. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than any document he had ever signed. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope Lily is okay. I hope you're okay. I want you to know something. You don't have to do this alone, and you don't have to keep punishing yourself. You deserve joy, real joy, not just the kind you built in towers and profit margins, the kind that walks, breathes, sings lullabies, and bakes pancakes. If someone ever comes into your life and brings back the sound of Lily's laughter, don't shut the door. Open it. Let them in." Thomas sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Not yet. He looked at Elena, who stood quietly, eyes lowered, hands folded. "I think she knew," he said, "about what kind of love I needed after her." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes they know before we do. The days that followed were filled with a quiet blooming. They didn't rush anything. There were no declarations. But their routines became rituals. The morning tea, the late-night check-ins, the shared glances across dinner tables. Lily grew lighter. She began to speak in full sentences. She laughed more. She asked Elena to braid her hair before school. She asked Thomas to read bedtime stories again. One evening, Lily came home with a painting from school. It was of 3 figures again, but this time they stood under a house with a heart on the roof. She called it Us. Thomas pinned it to the refrigerator. That night, as they cleaned up dinner together, he looked at Elena and said, "I think she sees what we're too afraid to say." Elena didn't answer right away. She rinsed a dish, dried her hands, and turned to face him. "Then maybe it's time we stop being afraid." And for the first time since Amanda's funeral, Thomas leaned in, not with guilt, but with clarity. He kissed her gently, the way one breathes after surfacing from a long time underwater. She didn't pull away. Her hands rested lightly against his chest, not holding on, but simply staying. The kiss didn't change everything, but it acknowledged it, and that was enough, for now. They stood there for a moment longer, the world outside lost to rain and night and time. The past hadn't disappeared, but in that kitchen, with the smell of rosemary still lingering and the sound of Lily humming upstairs, the future had finally found a way in. The days after that first kiss unfolded like a delicate dance, one neither of them had rehearsed, but both instinctively understood. Nothing was spoken aloud, but everything was felt. The way he waited for her in the kitchen each morning, the way she lingered a little longer when handing him his coffee, the way Lily smiled without asking questions, because some things even to a child made sense without explanation. And yet not everyone in the house welcomed the change. Gloria had begun to notice the subtle shifts. She was no fool. Her sense for disruptions in order had been honed over decades, and though Elena was always polite, always restrained something about her calmness, unsettled Gloria more than outright rebellion would have. It came to a head one gray Friday morning. Thomas had left early for a business meeting, and Elena was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Gloria walked in. Arms crossed her lips, thin and pressed tight. "You've made yourself very comfortable here," Gloria said, without preamble. Elena paused, then continued whisking eggs. "I do what's asked of me." "That's not what I meant," Gloria replied. "I've seen it. The walks in the garden, the quiet dinners, the looks." Helena didn't respond. She poured the eggs into a pan and stirred gently. Gloria stepped closer. "You think he's falling for you? Maybe he is. Maybe he's blinded by his grief. But don't think for 1 second that makes you part of this family." Finally, Elena looked up. "I never claimed to be." "No, you just act like it," Gloria snapped. "You act like this is your home. Like that little girl is your daughter. Like you can replace Amanda." Elena set down the spatula and turned off the stove. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were steady. "No one will ever replace Amanda. Not for Thomas, not for Lily, not for me," Gloria scoffed. "You barely knew her. I knew her more than you think," Elena said softly. Gloria frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means that before Amanda died, I met her. Briefly, in the hospital." Gloria stared confused. Elena continued. "I was volunteering at the children's wing. My son had passed 6 months earlier. I was still trying to understand how to breathe again. Amanda was there with Lily. Routine checkup. We spoke for 20 minutes about motherhood, about loss, about love." She paused. She was kind. She was exhausted, but she was kind. "I never forgot her." Gloria narrowed her eyes. "Convenient story." "Believe it or not, Elena said I'm not here for your approval." Gloria stepped forward. "You may have fooled Thomas, but not me. You come into this house with no real resume, no references, and suddenly you're the woman he can't stop watching. That's not love, that's desperation." Elena's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "You don't know what love is, Gloria. You know control. You know routines and roles, and keeping people in their place. But love doesn't ask for permission. It shows up in the quietest moments and demands nothing but truth." Gloria scoffed again, louder this time. "You're a nobody, and when this ends, and it will, you'll be right back where you came from." That afternoon, Thomas returned home early. He found Lily coloring in the living room and Elena in the garden, kneeling by the rosemary bush. He noticed her eyes were red. "What happened?" he asked. She looked up at him and hesitated. "Nothing I can't handle." He crouched beside her. "Elena, don't do that, not with me." She looked at him, and for a moment, the mask she wore each day slipped. "She hates me, Gloria. She doesn't believe I belong here." Thomas sighed, standing. He walked to the edge of the garden and stared at the house. Gloria's loyalty to this family runs deep, but she doesn't get to decide who becomes part of it. Elena rose slowly. "That's not the issue. The issue is whether you've decided." Thomas turned to her. "I have." "Then say it," she whispered. "Not with glances or favors or lingering silences. Say it." He stepped toward her close enough to feel her breath. "I'm falling in love with you. I don't know how or when, but I am. And it terrifies me, because it means letting go of the grief I've been holding onto like a shield." Her eyes welled. "And what if you can't let go?" "Then I'll ask you to help me," he said. "Every day if I have to." She nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. He reached out and wiped it away, and the garden around them felt less like a memory and more like a beginning. That evening, Thomas asked Gloria to meet him in the study. She stood stiffly by the fireplace, arms crossed. "You've been with my family for 30 years," he said. "I owe you a great deal. Loyalty, trust, but not silence." She narrowed her eyes. "Sir, you confronted Elena. You accused her of manipulating her way into this home, into our lives." Gloria's lips pressed together. "I was looking out for you, for Lily. You were protecting a version of this family that no longer exists," he said. "Amanda is gone. That truth doesn't diminish her, but it demands that we keep living, that Lily grows, that I grow." "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "No," Thomas replied. "I'm choosing a new chapter, and if you can't support that, then perhaps it's time you take some time away. Reflect, decide what your role in this family truly is." Gloria didn't argue. She left the room without a word. When Thomas returned to the garden, Elena was still there, trimming back overgrown leaves. She looked up as he approached. "Everything okay?" "It will be," he said. "I told her. All of it." Elena nodded. "And she didn't fight," he said. "Maybe that's its own kind of acceptance." They stood together in silence, the scent of rosemary thick in the air. "You said something earlier," she said, "about falling in love. You're not the only one." He smiled. "I was hoping that might be the case." She reached for his hand, and they stood like that until the sky turned a dusky lavender. Inside the house, Lily sat at the piano pressing random keys, not yet a melody, but no longer just noise. Outside, two people stood in the remains of a garden once built by another woman, now blooming with a love that asked for nothing but honesty and a little time. The next morning began with a softness that almost felt staged. Light spilled gently through the kitchen windows. Birds sang quietly from the pine trees outside, and the house itself seemed to exhale after weeks of holding its breath. Thomas made breakfast with his sleeves rolled up, frying eggs, while Elena sliced fruit beside him. Lily danced between them, humming a song she had learned at school. It would have been the perfect scene if not for the envelope waiting on the doorstep. It was plain unmarked, addressed only with his name in looping handwriting. Thomas opened it at the kitchen table while Elena read to Lily in the den. Inside were 2 photographs and a single line typed on cream-colored paper. "You should know who she really is." The first photo was grainy but clear. It showed Elena standing outside a courthouse with a man and a young boy. The second was worse. A newspaper clipping, "Local teacher loses custody battle after son's death ruled preventable." Thomas stared at it, not blinking, not breathing. The words blurred, but the headline screamed. He read the line again. "You should know who she really is." For minutes he didn't move. His heart beat faster, louder, harder. He stood and walked to the hallway, stopping just outside the den. Elena was sitting cross-legged on the floor, Lily beside her, both absorbed in a book. She was laughing at something Lily had said, her eyes crinkling the way they always did when joy caught her off guard. He cleared his throat. She looked up instantly, sensing something. "Can we talk?" he asked. She rose, brushing her skirt. "Of course." They stepped into the library. He closed the door behind them. Elena waited calm until he laid the envelope on the table between them. Her eyes fell to the photographs. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. "I was wondering when this would come," she said softly. "So it's true," he asked, "that you lost custody?" "Yes." "That your son's death wasn't natural?" Her voice caught slightly. "That's not what it says. It says preventable, which is not the same thing. But yes, I lost custody. And no, his death was not caused by anything I did. but people needed someone to blame. He stared at her, the pain in his eyes, a storm building. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't think it would matter here. Because I was afraid that if you knew you'd look at me like this. Like what? Like you don't know me anymore. He turned away, pressing his fingers to his eyes. Do you know what this looks like to me? It looks like you came into this house, into my daughter's life, carrying a secret you hoped no one would find out. No, she said. I came into this house with grief, not secrets. I never pretended to be perfect, Thomas. You just assumed I was. How could I trust you with Lily now? He asked, voice breaking. Because I've never once lied to her, or to you. I loved my son. I made mistakes. I lived through hell. But I would never harm a child. I would never do anything to put Lily in danger. You know that. He sat down heavily. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she stepped closer. I will answer anything you want. I won't hide, but I won't beg either. You asked me to help you breathe again, and I did. But you have to decide if you still want to keep breathing with me in the room. With that, she turned and left the library. That night, the house was silent again. Lily went to sleep without asking for a story. Elena remained in her room. Thomas stood in the hallway between them, paralyzed. The next day, she packed her things. No one stopped her, not because they didn't want to, but because some wounds need silence to understand. She left a note on Lily's desk, a short one. I will always be near, in the stars, in the stories, in the pancakes. La vie. The following week was a haze. Gloria returned to her duties with quiet professionalism. Lily reverted. She became quieter, her eyes heavier. Thomas moved through the house like a man trying to remember what light felt like. The envelope haunted him, not just its contents, but what it meant about himself. That he still expected people to be spotless. That he still measured worth by reputation. Then on the 8th day, something shifted. Lily came into his room holding the newspaper clipping. Her small hands trembled. Why did you make her leave? She asked. Thomas froze. Lily. She didn't do anything wrong. She told me about Matteo. She told me about the stars. She told me the truth. He swallowed hard. I was scared. But she wasn't, Lily whispered. She stayed, even when she was sad. He knelt beside her. Do you miss her every minute? She placed the clipping in his hands. Then go get her. That afternoon, Thomas made calls. He reached out to a journalist who had written the original story. He asked questions. He requested court records. He read through transcript statements, appeal documents. And what he discovered shook him. Elena had not lost custody because she was negligent. She lost it because she was grieving, and in the eyes of a system that feared pain more than incompetence, grief made her unfit. Matteo's death had been due to a rare reaction during surgery. The hospital had settled quietly, but the damage to her reputation had remained. Thomas sat in his office for hours thinking about the woman who had rebuilt his daughter's spirit, about the pain she carried so gracefully, about the love he had walked away from out of fear. He drove that night. 2 hours north, Elena was working in a small coastal diner, according to one of the addresses he'd found. When he walked through the door, she was wiping down a booth, her back to him. He spoke her name. She turned slowly. You found me, she said, no surprise in her voice. I never stopped looking, he replied. She stood still, waiting. He pulled a folded letter from his jacket. Amanda wrote this, before she died. He handed it to her. Elena unfolded it and read. Then she looked up. She knew. She did, he said. And so do I now. "What do you want from me, Thomas?" He stepped closer. "I want to come back. To the garden, to the kitchen, to the sound of Lily's laughter when you're near. I want to stop holding the past like it's a shield. I want to love you, even if it's messy, especially because it's real." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't need saving, I know," he said, "but maybe we can save each other." She didn't move. Then she reached for his hand, and just like that, the ache between them became breath again. Not perfect, but alive. 3 weeks later, the Bennett house did not look different, but it felt completely transformed. The silence that once echoed down its marble halls had been replaced with music, the clinking of breakfast dishes, and Lily's laughter drifting from room to room. Elena moved through the house like someone who had always belonged there, not as a guest or employee, but as something softer, something permanent. She still made pancakes on Mondays and tucked wildflowers into old jars, but now she did it with sleeves rolled up beside Thomas, who watched her like a man learning to recognize joy again. Gloria remained in the house, though quieter than before. She had apologized to Elena in her own stiff way, bringing her a folded apron and muttering something about routines needing adjustments. Elena had nodded, accepting the gesture, not because it was enough, but because healing wasn't about revenge. Lily began playing the piano again, not because someone asked her to, but because one day she simply sat down and touched the keys like she remembered how. One evening after dinner, she asked Thomas if they could set up the telescope in the garden the one Amanda had bought for her birthday. Elena stood beside him as they watched their daughter aim the lens toward the night sky. "Do you think Matteo would have liked her?" Thomas asked. Elena smiled without looking away. "He would have adored her. She asks better questions than most adults I know." Thomas reached for her hand, their fingers interlacing with ease, now no hesitation. "I used to think grief was something you survived," he said quietly. "But it's more like something you carry, and for a while I forgot how to carry anything without letting it break me." Elena leaned into him. "And now I carry it differently," he said. "Not lighter, but together." A week later, Lily brought home a school assignment titled My Family. It was a simple drawing, 3 figures again, like always, but this time under a house with a heart in the window and stars drawn all around it. Thomas pinned it to the refrigerator beside Elena's favorite quote, "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stay when it's easier to run." One evening, just before Lily's 7th birthday, Thomas stood in the garden watching as Elena lit a small candle beside the rosemary bush. "For Matteo," she said. "For Amanda," he added. Then together, for everything we lost and everything we found. The candle flickered against the wind, but it didn't go out. Inside the house, Lily waited with a storybook open, asking if Aunt Elena would read her the next chapter. And Elena did with Thomas, sitting beside her, their voices blending softly over the pages. They didn't need to say the word family aloud anymore. It was stitched into the fabric of every morning, every bedtime, every moment that passed without fear. And when Lily asked one night if love could grow again after something big was broken, Elena smiled and said, "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly how light gets in. Because love, real love, is not the absence of pain, but the choice to stand beside it and keep going anyway. It is not built in grand gestures, but in small, unthinkable acts of showing up day after day, even with a cracked heart. And sometimes the best stories don't begin with falling in love. They begin with learning how to live again